in Nigeria by maintaining previous progress and inclusively promoting electoral reforms. It is this regard that the Citizens Memo contains several significant proposals centered around the imperative of enhancing the operational independence and impartiality of the Independent National Electoral Commission, facilitating early voting and diaspora participation to promote greater inclusivity. And I'm sure this question of early voting should interest those of us in the media, because as journalists, during general elections, we are accredited not in hundreds but in thousands. I think the last general election, more than 11,000 journalists were accredited by INEC to cover the elections in different parts, and some of our colleagues traveled elsewhere apart from where they registered. And on that basis, many did not vote. The same thing applies to security personnel and the rest of them that are normally on election duty. They don't just vote because of the nature of their work. There's also the imperative of advancing party democracy and limiting money's role in politics, improving the transparency of election result collation. And that's very important. Collation centers are usually the centers of manipulation and transmission, and enhancing the legal framework to facilitate the prompt prosecution of electoral offenses, as Cynthia well enumerated in our welcome remarks. Although these proposals have been submitted to the National Assembly by the EUSDGN cohort led by IAGA Africa, they represent substantive concepts rather than purely theoretical ideas. These are documented as citizens' memos, reflecting insights gathered from engagements with Nigerians across all geopolitical zones. This approach is facilitated by the EUSDGN program, which aims to promote a pluralistic, participatory, and representative democracy in Nigeria through 5 components that provide support to the Independent National Electoral Commission, the National Assembly, and the judiciary, political parties, civil society, the media, as well as women, youth, and persons with disabilities. These are the constituencies or target beneficiaries or target audiences that we've been working with over the years. And like Cynthia said, in the course of interacting with them, a whole issue came up about trust in the electoral process. The International Press Center in particular had engagements in about 4 geopolitical zones where we had town hall meetings on rebuilding trust. And some of the reforms that we're pushing here are suggestions that came from some of those town hall engagements on what would make the citizens to have trust or to renew their trust in the electoral process, which was somewhat affected in the aftermath of the 2023 elections. Distinguished colleagues and media leaders, notwithstanding the considerable efforts invested in advancing the Citizens Memo, we have now reached a pivotal juncture where media support is both essential and highly valued. As the National Assembly reconvenes, it will be reviewing several proposals for electoral reforms to determine their feasibility for enactment within the statutory period required for amendments to take effect before the 2027 general elections. That's the next one. Historical precedents, such as the 12-year campaign for Nigeria's Freedom of Information Act, demonstrates that meaningful reform is often achieved when the media actively champions the cause. Throughout that advocacy effort for the Freedom of Information Act, the media played a significant role by serializing the bill's content, publishing editorials, columns, news reports, features, analytical pieces, vox pops, and interviews Additionally, media organizations and professional bodies contributed to public hearings through formal presentations in 2011. Additionally, it should be noted that electoral reforms previously mentioned were also achieved with media support, reflecting a pattern observed in other countries such as Canada, New Zealand, Mexico, South Korea, and some Eastern European nations, where the media actually served as a catalyst for legislative and policy advancements when it comes to elections. In conclusion, therefore, this consultative forum has been convened to enhance our shared understanding of the issues in the Citizens' Memorandum on Electoral Reforms, so that the media can be well placed to do the following: establish a public agenda regarding the proposed reforms through targeted editorialization of the issues, like we did for the Freedom of Information Bill, engage key electoral stakeholders and political actors, and encourage them to consider supporting the reforms. Invite media organizations, associations, and professional bodies. I'm glad that some of the executives here present were also leaders and are still leaders of umbrella media professional bodies. For example, Mr. Dotun Oladipo is the immediate past president of the Guild of Corporate Online Publishers and others. Enhance public understanding and effectively address any misconceptions regarding the reforms. We are not taking them for granted. There are those who may feel that some of these things are not necessary or possibly not achievable. And encourage, and this is the key thing now, members of the National Assembly as elected representatives to consider passing the proposed reforms.
When you see citizens talk about democracy failing because they've lost trust in the elections, you wouldn't blame them. You would tell people, oh, it's not just about voting. You vote, and then you engage and you demand accountability. Democracy is the government of all of you. What they will tell you, if the elections do not work, if the elections are not credible, then we don't trust in it. And so for us, as partners working on these, the reason we place a lot of effort and invest a lot in supporting our electoral process is because we know that if we get elections right, then we are on the right path of re-inspiring and rebuilding trust in democracy itself, which is why we take the work around elections seriously. But it's not just about that. It's because we're seeing consistently the younger generation losing faith in democracy. If we follow what is happening in West Africa, we've seen the trend of military takeovers, but we've also seen a lot of demands or questions from younger generation on a possibility for a military takeover in Nigeria. If you follow conversations on TikTok and social media spaces like Instagram, you see the younger generation, especially for those, the Gen Zs as we call them, who were not actively present during the military dictatorship, demanding for military takeover, because they are seeing videos from countries like Burkina, and for them, that could be a template to implement. And so we have a bigger role as citizens to ensure that whatever we're doing, we are rebuilding and inspiring the trust of the younger generation in democracy, because achieving sustainable democracy begins with having the generations that are building leadership that can sustain the culture and practice of democracy. And if you have a younger generation who do not think democracy matters, then we've lost the fight for a democracy that works for Nigeria. And so while we're having these conversations today, and my role, honestly, is to welcome us, I want us to reflect on certain things we highlight as priority issues on electoral reform, and why we think it's important in promoting an inclusive democratic space that promotes and inspires faith in democracy itself. And one of those issues that we're pushing for is the independence of the Electoral Commission. Not because independence is not in the name of INEC, I mean it's Independent National Electoral Commission. But because we've also seen over time that independence, the idea of independence, is founded on several factors. And one of that is the administrative independence of the institution, the ability of the institution to function professionally without any form of partisanship, and its ability to deliver on its mandate in a way that citizens trust the outcome of elections. And the advocacy this time around is the review of the power of appointment for the leadership of the Electoral Commission, which includes the chairman, the national commissioners, and the resident electoral commissioner. That is the leadership of the Electoral Commission. I always say that when the head is faulty, the body would have its problem. It's the same thing when if you have headache, you'd struggle to function because something is not right. And we believe that if we fix the issues at the top, we can begin to build an institution that can sustain the credible elections we desire. And so that is one of the advocacy. This advocacy dates back to the Ways Committee report. And at the time, the proposal was for the NJC to take care of that responsibility. But we're also saying that because of the trends in our political space, and even how citizens are beginning to question the independence of the judiciary, perhaps the NJC may not be the home that we want to bestow that power of appointment. And so the proposal of can we have a multi-stakeholder approach to the appointment of the leadership of INEC. And we'll discuss that subsequently. The second proposal for us is a compulsory electronic transmission of results. And that is because a lot of citizens believe that if we have a complementary process to the results management that promotes transparency, then citizens can trust the electoral outcome. In 2023, INEC piloted the IREV, the INEC Results Viewing Portal. However, the decisions from the Presidential Elections Tribunal highlighted several gaps in the Electoral Act. And the idea this time is, can we advocate for strengthening the provisions in the Electoral Act so that it is compulsory, not as a substitute to the manual, but as a complementary part of the manual process. The other issue we're hoping to discuss further on today is issues around concluding elections cases before swearing in. If we think about the fact that we are always in an election, this year we have a number of elections. Last year we had Edo and Ondo. The year before, after the presidential and general elections, we had Imo, Kogi, Bayelsa. The reasons we have off-cycle elections is because elections petitions most times went on post-swearing in, and so it changed the electoral calendar in most states. We do not think the idea of off-cycle election is one that is sustainable. But we also believe that if we end all cases before swearing in, it allows us settle down for governance itself, not get carried away by the court's decisions. So that is one conversation we'll be having. How do we count this? How do we ensure we conclude issues of elections before swearing in? And then we're looking at early and special voting, and I think our media partners in the room would love this. We've spoken with some reporters. Some of them, the last time they voted was probably 1999 or maybe 2003. Some of them have not voted in general elections for a long period of time. We've seen that consistently, while elections ought to be inclusive, we have a category of citizens who do not get to vote, not because they're not eligible, but because they work on elections day. And the idea for early voting is to advance voting rights for those that work on elections day, the electoral officials, security personnel, media practitioners, accredited observer groups. And that is because the data from the last general elections indicates that approximately almost 2 million Nigerians work on elections day and did not get to vote because of the work that they are doing. We've seen this work in countries in Africa. In Ghana, they vote five days ahead of elections, where those who are accredited apply to the commission and they get to vote before. We will discuss that and also the nitty-gritties around implementation. And then the issues around unbundling INEC, especially setting up the Electoral Offences Commission to reduce the culture of impunity, and the Political Party Registration Commission also, which are bills that we as partners are pushing for. And I think the last issue we're pushing or advocating for is allow electronic voter accreditation or voter identification. We've seen the hurdle the PVC process causes, and we've learned that some citizens, after registration, do not get to collect their PVCs. But also the PVC process has also become too politicized, that you have times where people hijack PVCs for a particular location, and citizens who own those PVCs not even get to have that. But we're also saying we have the beavers. If we're leveraging technology, and can we ensure that we use it to its maximum capacity? So why do we need PVCs when all our identification is on the beavers? And now beavers is compulsory, that without electronic accreditation of voters, you cannot vote. And so these are parts of the proposals. And I said the idea is, there are several others, but we identified what we call 6 priority issues, because we know that we cannot achieve everything in one reform system or one reform circle. We know we're always in the season of electoral reform, and most times we get tired about it. But the truth is, dear Nigerians, fellow Nigerians, our country is one that has to constantly go through reform, because even our formation process was not perfect. No country had a perfect formation system. We invest, the people build systems. Systems do not exist they don't exist in abstract. People build systems. And so as Nigerians, we cannot get tired, we cannot give up, we cannot get frustrated. We have to keep doing the best that we can to build the system until it serves our purpose, until it rebuilds confidence, until citizens, Nigerians, young people, until they are proud of being Nigerians, until they talk about Nigeria with national pride when they are in Nigeria, not only when they are living abroad. Because what we've had now is a culture of younger people. They leave the country. When they are leaving, they curse Nigeria. Then they go to Canada, the UK, US, and they are proudly Nigerians. So it's almost like the love of Nigeria is ignited when you're outside. We want to change that trend and culture. We want the love of Nigeria to be reignited when we're living in Nigeria. And one way to achieve that is to work together, to agree on these consensus issues, and engage the electoral reform process so that this reform process will produce outcomes that can rebuild trust in our democracy.
And among the critical challenges are those in the electoral process which need to be fixed and which has been receiving the attention of stakeholders. And by attention of stakeholders, I'm talking of attention on one hand of our colleagues in the media. Seeing the variety of people who are here, I know very well that these are people who have been engaged in all these issues for many years. On the other hand, attention from stakeholders, meaning also civil society colleagues, like those who work within the EUSGM cluster, who have been working tirelessly to address these issues as well. So today's event is one of the steps in the initiatives of the stakeholders. As we have been informed in the earlier 2 remarks, a group of civil society organizations within the USGN cohort has done extensive work leading to the development of a citizens' memorandum on electoral reform. As we have been told, and as we shall see as we go into the conversations, this is a landmark document which has distilled the gaps in electoral policy and practice and collected the priority reform areas for our attention. The process of advancing these reforms is a great stakeholder assignment. If you like, it is a multi-stakeholder assignment. And one of the critical stakeholders is the media. As we all know, the media has very central and strategic roles to play in the process. Media professionals, as you know, can provide public education, facilitate understanding of the reform issues for stakeholders, including voters and policymakers, highlight the existing gaps and the recommendations to fix them, and generally set and pursue a citizen-centric agenda that leads to the desired reforms. I think good work has been done From the variety of people who are here, we can see multiplicity, maybe that's not the word, different kinds of roles, within the media. Very, very rich selection. We have a group here, that has depth, that has inclusion. Look at it from various ways, whether it's, we want to talk of gender, we want to geographical representation, we want to talk of inclusion in terms of media platforms and so on and so forth.